Many of you probably don't know this about me, but I am actually quite an accomplished sailor. And by that, I mean I've been on a sailboat one time. But it's actually crazy, the thing that happened on my one sailboat excursion, and it's probably why I've never been on a sailboat again. When I was studying at Trinity Western University, my sister was there as well, and she was dating her now husband. And so during one of the break times that you have when you're at university, we decided to all go down to the States to visit his parents, and his dad had a sailboat. And so one of the days it was like, let's go on like a little excursion. And I can't remember the name of the river, but this huge, big, wide river. And we kind of sailed up it to this park and then got off and had a picnic there and hung out at the park. And then we were going to sail back to the marina where his boat was kept. But we actually stayed a little too long at the park. And so as we began to sail back, it was dark. It was already evening. And as we're sailing down this river, the boat actually hit a sandbar, and we were kind of stuck sideways in the sailboat on this sandbar. And so my brother-in-law's dad is calling out things. Andrew, go to the front of the thing and do this with the little pulley thing. And I'm like, oh, okay. And put up the one sail, and we'll see if we can just kind of dislodge ourselves. And so we're obeying all these commands, and it's like no matter what we do, we just cannot get this sailboat unstuck. And now, let me remind you, it's dark now, and we're in the middle of this big river, and we're stuck on a sandbar. So I, took a volleyball and drew a face on it, and I'm like, Wilson! And I just freaked out, right? So we called the Coast Guard, and the response that was given was, well, it's too dark. It's not safe for us to try and come in the middle, of the dark to try and help you. Just stay in the boat, and we'll come in the morning. So for all night, we were on this boat that was kind of at a 45-degree angle, and we waited, and then in the morning, the Coast Guard came, and they did whatever they did, and they hauled us out of there. And so since then, I have never been on a sailboat ever again. That story came to mind this week because that was 18, 19 years ago. And it came to my mind because we've been looking through the book of Acts, and in chapter 27, we read about a shipwreck that Paul experiences. And as soon as I read it, I'm like, I feel you, Paul. I know exactly what you're going through, brother. But honestly, chapter 27, we're going to see that Paul begins his journey to Rome. We've seen for the last several chapters that Paul is in Jerusalem and he's in Caesarea, and there's all of these different trials that are going on, and everyone's trying to figure out what are we going to do with Paul, and he's been in prison for several years already, and now he's actually going to start his journey to Rome, and chapter 27 of the book of Acts is like an insane story. Paul is actually going to get shipwrecked and be in a massive storm at sea for 14 days. And it actually reads like what you would read in an adventure novel or in a movie about, old ships. It reminds me of Treasure Island or Swiss Family Robinson. And you read it and you're like, this is an unbelievable story. It is such a wild story that actually some people have said, is Luke kind of fabricating the details a little bit? It just sounds so insane, but we can actually have confidence that this is actually what happened. There was a man by the name of James Smith who lived in the 1800s, and he wrote a book called The Voyage and Shipwreck of St. Paul. And he was a soldier and a sailor for 30 years. This man was an amateur geologist and a geographer, and he actually spent the winter of 1844 and 1845 in Malta, which is in our story this morning. And what he did was he studied weather patterns and navigation and seamanship in the Mediterranean because he wanted to see, okay, is Luke's account in Acts 27 actually accurate? And through all of his research and all of his study, he came to the conclusion that this is a 100% accurate story that Luke records for us. It's not fanciful. Stuff like this has actually happened before in that part of the world. But more than just an exciting story, and it is, more than that, I think our passage today actually gives us spiritual insight into how you and I react when we go through storms in life. Now, I'm not saying that chapter 27 is just like an allegory and it didn't actually happen, and Luke was saying like, it's all about metaphorical storms. That's not what I'm saying. This is an actual storm that they went through. But because it's the Word of God, I think there's actually deep spiritual insights that we can pull from it for the different types of storms or hardships or pain or trials that you and I will go through. Like I began with like a silly sailing story where my life was not really in danger at all. And yet, myself and my family, we have faced actual storms. Tragedy and heartache and pain in life, all different manners of it. I mean, I've shared lots of stories with you over the years, but you know, when you buy a house and then the night before you're going to take possession of the house, you get a phone call that says, ooh, actually the bank is taking your dream house away, and you kind of go, wait, what? What is happening? We don't have a house to live in anymore. We have had both on my wife's side and my side loved ones who are just chronically sick and dealing with pain every day, and you're going, God, what are you doing? We've had our middle daughter have a seizure where we thought we were going to lose her. So not just like, oh yeah, I'm sailing on a river, but actual like deep pain and heartache and times in life where you're like, this kind of feels like a storm going on. So what we want to do is ask, well, how do you and I respond in those types of seasons in life? And I think our text today actually helps us. It gives us a few answers. So what I want to do is walk through the passage in 4 sections. We're going to look at all of chapter 27. And then just really 2 things that I think we can pull from it when you and I are going through pain, heartache, hardship, storms of life, that we need to remember God's presence and also remember God's purposes. Okay, so section number 1, verses 1 to 12, from Caesarea to Crete. So this is what it says. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. So like I said, if you have been tracking with us for the last 5 chapters, we know that it's just been courtroom scene after courtroom scene. I've heard a few of you who are like, can we just get through the book of Acts? It seems like it's the same thing every week. And I agree, because Paul was in all of these different trials and meetings and trying to figure out what to do. And he's been kept in Caesarea for over 2 years because they just don't know really what to do with him. What are the charges that we can send him to Rome to be put in front of Caesar? And so we start our passage in verse 1 that it was decided, okay, it's time to go. We're going to sail for Italy. And so Paul and some other prisoners are given to a centurion named Julius, and they finally embark on a ship from Adramyttium. That was just a small little coastal city on the coast of the Mediterranean. And so what we need to kind of visualize is this is actually quite a small boat. The reason we know that is that we're told that specifically this boat was just going along all the ports of the coast. So this is a small boat not meant to, hey, we're going to sail across the Mediterranean. This was a small little ship that would just go from port to port along the coast. And so we're told that that's exactly what happens. Luke and Aristarchus are with Paul. These are 2 other Christian brothers. We're told specifically that Aristarchus is there, and we know that Luke is there because you may have noticed that it's all we language that is now used. So we got on the boat and we did this. And so Luke is the one that wrote the book of Acts. And so we know, okay, well, he's with Paul now. He's recording these things firsthand. And so they go along the coast, and we're told that they arrive in Sidon, and Paul is actually allowed to go off the ship and visit his friends and to be cared for. So already in a short amount of time, we see Paul having a really good rapport with the centurion Julius, that Julius would actually trust him. Most likely a guard was sent with Paul, but hey, Paul, you can go get off the ship. Go see your friends. Go get cared for. So already there's this good relationship between Paul and Julius, and that'll play into it a little later in the story as well. So verse 4. After putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go further, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmon. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lycia. So I'm going to put up a map for you because I think sometimes it's helpful to just kind of visualize that these stories took place in a real part of the world. And so the purple line is the journey, and you can see at the bottom there, Paul's in Jerusalem, he goes to Caesarea, and then literally, they just go along the coast, stopping in all those ports. And then we're told that they sail around the lee of Cyprus. That just means on the sheltered side of the island because the winds were bad. And so you can kind of see, the route that they're taking, and then they go along. And finally, we're told that Julius finds a bigger ship. He finds a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy. So you need to realize Alexandria was in Egypt, and Egypt was the biggest supplier of grain to Rome. And so these would be much bigger ships that often would take grain across the Mediterranean up to Rome. And so it's like Julius then says, well, now I'm commandeering this ship, and myself and these prisoners, you have to now take us on board this grain ship to take us the rest of the way to Rome. Now we're told that they go around Crete, which is the big red circle. I circled it for you. That's the island of Crete. They go around the island of Crete with difficulty, and then they arrive in a little port called Fair Havens. Doesn't that sound beautiful? You're like, let's go to Fair Havens for the winter, right? And so they finally arrive in this lovely sounding port. Now, what I want you to notice is already this journey, they're maybe halfway to Rome, and already there's been a lot of difficulty. There's bad winds, it's slow going, we have to go around certain sides of the islands because we just can't fight the winds. And so already on this journey we're going, okay, they've encountered some difficulty, but they finally arrive in Crete, and they're in this port called Fair Havens. Verse 9, since much time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said, and because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. So we're told that a significant amount of time has passed now, and actually it's become quite dangerous to sail on the Mediterranean. We're given a little bit of a hint when Luke records for us that the fast was already over. What he means by that is the Day of Atonement. There was one day of the year that the Jews would fast on, and that's the Day of Atonement. And we're quite certain that this is taking place in the year 59 AD. And the Day of Atonement that year was in the middle of October. And just so you're aware of kind of the patterns and the customs of that part of the world, from the beginning of September or the middle of September until the the start of November was very dangerous sailing times in the Mediterranean. Like, if you didn't have to sail in September, October, November, don't, because the waters are really bad. So let me remind you, what's the time? Well, we're well into October now, and so it's like, we are losing our window for good sailing. Already it's dangerous, and actually from November to March in the winter months, hardly anybody sailed in the Mediterranean. You just don't do that unless you want to die. Like the sailing is very bad. It's not good, a good season, and it's not worth the risk to your life. So Paul is on a ship, and we're nearing the end of October, and already, okay, we're almost in November. We are losing our window to make it to Rome. And I love that Paul advises them. So notice that there's probably a good amount of trust and a good rapport between the centurion and Paul that they would even listen to Paul. Right? Can you imagine the meeting? It's not like Paul's like, hey, I have something to say. We shouldn't go. The picture is that Paul's actually included in these discussions. Now, I want to remind you that Paul has already spent a lot of time on the sea. There was a scholar that just kind of added up from the New Testament, from the book of Acts, all of the journeys that Paul has done that are recorded for us by sea. Paul has already traveled 3,500 miles on the Mediterranean. So he's not like some guy, he's not like me who's been on a boat once. Okay, he has been a lot of times on a boat. To make it even clearer, Paul, when this is recorded for us, this journey, he's already written the book of 2 Corinthians. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul says that he's already been shipwrecked 3 times. And he spent a night and a day adrift at sea. So listen, Paul knows what it's like to be on a boat. And so obviously, whether people on the ship just knew about Paul or he talked about his voyages before, for whatever reason, he's included in the conversation. And Paul advises them, guys, this voyage is not going to go well. I've perceived that there's going to be a lot of injury and loss, both to the ship and the cargo and possibly to our lives. I don't think we should try and go any further. We should winter in fair havens. But we're told the centurion pays more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship. And you need to know there would be economic and personal reasons to try and keep going, get a little bit closer to Rome. Because listen, let me remind you, this ship is full of grain that is heading to Rome. And so there are economic reasons to try and at least get closer. And then if you have to winter in another city, okay, fine, but at least we're a little bit closer. So then when it's safer to sail, we can just get to Rome and get the payday. Actually, Emperor Claudius, the emperor of Rome, would offer a bounty to ship owners who were willing to sail in dangerous seasons in order to bring grain to Rome. So I have no doubt in my mind that this ship was no different. That Emperor Claudius had said, hey, if you can actually make it, you're going to get a bonus because we need grain. So the captain of the ship and the owner of the ship are probably thinking, okay, we're losing our window, but let's try and get a little bit closer to Rome because we have all this grain that we need to deliver. We're also told that Fair Havens, as beautiful as it sounds, was not a suitable harbor to winter in because if you just look on a map, the harbor is actually open a lot more to the elements, and so storms could still come in and damage the ship. And so the decision is made, well, let's try and reach Phoenix. It's a better harbor, we can winter there. So look, even 2,000 years ago, people wanted to leave and go winter in Phoenix, okay? That's like, wow, even then, they're like, let's get out of here. Let's go to Phoenix. So Phoenix was a port city 40 miles away. So listen, it's not a long journey, like a 40-mile journey to a much safer harbor, and the decision is made, well, let's get there, and then perhaps we can winter there because it's a lot safer. So that's not what happens, though, which leads us to our second section, the storm at sea, starting in verse 13. Now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete close to the shore. But soon, a tempestuous wind called the Northeaster, struck down from the land, and when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. So it sounds good, right? At the beginning, we're in Fair Havens, and all of a sudden a nice, beautiful, calm south wind starts to blow, and it's like, well, here's our chance. Let's head to Phoenix. It's 40 miles. We can make it. And then it says, but then a storm arises. The wording is a tempestuous wind called a northeaster. The Greek word, which is what it was originally written in, is literally where we get the word typhoon from, like a hurricane force wind. So don't think like, oh, it's just one of those like light storms. Think hurricane. Like, can you look at the difference? Oh, beautiful south wind, we're going to make it. Hurricane now hits them, and we're told that the ship is caught in it, and the ship can't fight against these winds that are blowing it. And so what happens is they just give way to the wind. Verse 16, running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. And after hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. So in the midst of this massive hurricane force storm, it says that they try and go on the sheltered side of a little island called Cauda. And when they do that, it's so that they can secure the lifeboat. That's what it means when it says we managed to secure the ship's boat. In that day, as you would sail, your lifeboat was just dragged behind the ship. And so if you think about it, that's super dangerous in a storm, because more than likely the lifeboat is now full with water. And if it's being thrown around, and let's say a wave throws it up and it smashes into the side of the main boat, like it can cause damage. So they're like, we got to attach this lifeboat. And so they manage to hoist it up, and then they secure the life raft on the boat. Then we're told that they actually undergird the ship. So what that means is that they would pass ropes underneath the boat and then actually just tie the boat together. So they're worried that this ship is just going to blow apart. And so they're literally passing ropes underneath and then tying the ship together. We got to hold this ship together. Now, we're told that they are beginning to fear that they would run aground on the Syrtis. And because of that, they then lowered their anchor as they're driven along. So you have to understand, the Syrtis was a well-known sandbar off the coast of North Africa. It was an infamous sandbar that had a reputation for being a ship graveyard. And there were all sorts of legends about the Syrtis. So let me remind you that most people in this day and age are pagans. And what I mean by that is that they believe in a whole host of gods. They believe that there's a God for everything. And in that day and age, the sea was quite mysterious because no one really knew what was under the water. And so they would have all of these legends and stories about monsters, and the Syrtis, the sandbar, had all of these stories about monsters with tentacles that would come up and grab ships and bring them down, and all of these evil leviathans and behemoths and crazy sea creatures that would destroy boats. And then they would say, the gods put the Syrtis there as a way to punish people. So they have that in their mind. We are getting near the Syrtis. So if you want to put the map back up. So the Syrtis is, the bottom of the map is the northern coast of Africa. And if the sailors are beginning to fear we are going to hit the Syrtis, then the purple line kind of goes down. So listen, we don't know for sure for the route the ship took. For all we know, the map could look like this as they're tossed around. We have no idea. But I think if they're worried, man, we are going to run into the Syrtis, then most likely they are being blown way off course. Actually, the distance from Cauda, the small little island where they secured their lifeboat, and the Syrtis is 400 nautical miles. So what that should tell us is that this hurricane force wind is blowing them off course big time. And these pagan sailors are going, we're going to hit the Syrtis. And who knows what kind of monsters and creatures are going to destroy us. So the decision is made. Let's lower the gear or the anchor. Let's throw the anchor out, and hopefully the anchor drags on the bottom and it just slows us down so that we don't run into the Syrtis. Verse 18, since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us. All hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. So you can see the process, right? We're gonna hit a sandbar. The ship most likely is taking on water. We're trying to pass ropes underneath to keep it together, and so the decision is made, well, we need to throw our cargo overboard. Now, they don't dump the grain yet. We read about that later. It's almost like, okay, the grain is worth a lot. Let's hold on to that. But everything else, they throw overboard. Any other cargo, we're told that they throw the ship's tackle overboard. So this would be, sometimes they carried spare parts or tools with them. Lots of ships actually had on the side of the ship a spare mast, just in case the mast with the sail got damaged. So they most likely threw that overboard. They're like, anything that we don't need, let's throw it into the sea because we want to stay afloat. We're told that no sun or stars appeared for many days. And I don't know if you know this, but that's how they navigated. It's not like they had GPS. They literally would know where they are by the position of the sun, the moon, and the stars, and we're told for many days they couldn't see any of that. Can you imagine how frightening that would be? To be blown around, we're told violently tossed around, and you literally have no idea where you are. This is why Luke records for us that at that point, all hope of being saved was abandoned. Now, I don't think Luke means that Paul and him and Aristarchus, the Christians on board, gave up all hope, because we're going to see in a moment that doesn't seem to be the case. I think Luke is recording for us these pagan sailors are now at a place where they go, this is hopeless. We are never going to be rescued. Like, we're doomed. We're going to hit the Syrtis, a monster is going to destroy our ship, and we're all going to die. So as an aside, can I just say this, and we're going to come back to this at the end, but many followers of Jesus, many Christians, when faced with pain and suffering and storms, respond like pagans. And what I mean by that, I don't mean pagan to be like an offensive term. That's just what they literally are. But pagans, if you have this view of bad things happen, well, it means that you're being punished by the gods. Like if you go through pain or heartache or suffering or a storm at sea, the reason is because the gods are angry at you. And, Poseidon has sent a huge hurricane to punish you because you're bad and you need to be punished for the bad things that you have done. And I think sometimes Christians, even though we don't have that kind of worldview, we still think like that because we believe, well, if I do good things, then God won't let bad things happen to me because he owes me then. So if I do good things and I give money to charity and I don't swear and I do nice things for my neighbors, well, then that means that nothing bad should ever happen to me because God owes me. And then inevitably bad things happen and we say things like, God, what are you doing? Why can't you stop this from happening? Doesn't God love me? Is God punishing me? Why is he doing this? But can I just say, God never promises, ever, anywhere in Scripture, God never promises the avoidance of storms for followers of him. Never. Not once does he say, hey, you know what? Follow me and you'll never face hardship ever again. That's not in here. Nowhere does God say that. But do you know what God does promise over and over and over? His presence with us in the midst of the storm. So that leads us to the third section. the encouragement of God's presence. You may have noticed that so far in the storm, we haven't really heard anything from Paul. What's Paul doing in the midst of the storm? Like Luke is recording what all of the sailors are doing, and as they're trying to, lighten the ship, and they're putting the anchor down, and yet we haven't heard what's going on with Paul as he's on this ship. So verse 21, since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men. For I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told, but we must run aground on some island.'" So it's interesting, Paul's perspective of this whole storm. Now, when he says in verse 21, should have listened to me, it's not the way that it sounds, okay? Because I know, so for instance, when your spouse is like, "I'm going to go do this thing," and you know it's going to fail, and then it fails, and then you try really hard not to be like, "You should have listened to me." That's not what Paul is doing, okay? I think Paul is just saying, guys, didn't I say this was going to happen? And yet he doesn't say, "Now we're all doomed because you didn't listen to me." That's not what Paul says. What does he say? He says, take heart. Now, this is great. These are the same words that Jesus says to his disciples, right? In his last meeting with him before he dies. "Take heart, for I've overcome the world." Paul says, "Take heart, men." It literally means be of good cheer, have courage. No one is going to die. Paul says, not one of you is going to die, but the ship is going to be damaged. And so rightly so, probably everyone on board is like, "How can you be so sure, Paul? What are you talking about?" And so he tells us, well, last night an angel came. An angel sent by the God that I belong to and the God that I worship. And the angel told me, "Don't be afraid. Paul, you have to stand before Caesar." Meaning, Paul, you're going to make it to Rome. God is going to spare everyone with you on the ship. No one is going to die. And so Paul says again, take heart, be of cheer, have courage. It's going to happen exactly like God said. However, we're going to hit an island. So why? Why could Paul, in the midst of a storm, stand up and say, "Guys, be of good cheer. Take courage"? It's because God's presence is with them. He hasn't forgotten. It's not like, Paul's on the way to Rome and God goes, "Oh, whoops, I forgot that I promised that Paul would make it to Rome." No, God is with them in the storm. And he's going to protect them. He hasn't forgotten them. And so Paul says, listen, we can be of good courage. Verse 27, when the 14th night had come. Guys, this is a 2-week hurricane. That's a long time to be in a storm. When the 14th night had come, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. A little further on, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. So we're 2 weeks into a violent hurricane-style storm. They have been violently tossed back and forth. Now they're being driven across the Adriatic Sea, which is what they called part of the Mediterranean Sea. And we're told that they begin to suspect that they're nearing land. And so they take a sounding, which was a way that they would measure how far down the seafloor was, and just as by way of interest, how they did it, they would have a huge rock with a hole in it, and then they would stuff the hole with animal fat, and then they would have it on a rope, and they would lower it down, and then they would bring it back up, and if there was rocks and shells and things stuck in the animal fat, they would go, okay, the rock made it to the floor of the ocean. And how far down was the rope? So they took a sounding and were told that it was 20 fathoms, which is about 120 feet. And then a little bit later, they said, well, let's take another sounding, and they lowered their rope, and they saw that it was 15 fathoms, 90 feet. So they're going, okay, we're getting shallower. We're probably nearing land. And so the decision was made, well, we don't want to hit rocks and be shipwrecked, so we're going to put 4 anchors at the back of the ship and then just wait and pray for daylight. Now, in verse 30, we're told that there were several sailors who were actually trying to abandon ship. They want to get in the lifeboat and get out of here. And so under the pretense of, hey, we're going to go put some more anchors out front, which is just ridiculous. Like if you have 4 anchors in the back of the ship keeping you steady, it would make no sense. I'm just going to head to the front of the ship and just put a few more anchors out front as he's lowering the lifeboat. But that's what they were trying to do because they were abandoning ship. And so they're doing that, and Paul sees it, and he says to the centurion and the guards, hey, if anybody leaves the boat, I can't guarantee that we're going to be saved. That's really important. Paul has been told by God, no one on the ship is going to be harmed. And yet, if you take matters into your own hands and abandon ship, we can't guarantee that you won't die. You have to stay on the ship. Stay with us in the storm. And so I love that the soldiers, I think, very overcorrecting, just cut the lifeboat away. It's like, well, we could have used that. But you know what that message is to Paul? Hey, we're with you, Paul. No one's leaving the ship. We just cut away the lifeboat. Now we can't leave. Like, we're with you, man. If your God has promised that he'll protect us, no one is leaving the ship. Verse 33, as day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength, for not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you. And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then they were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. So Paul, look, like, it's just so amazing. Paul's attitude, right? We're in a 2-week storm being tossed back and forth, and all of these terrible things are happening. And he's like, you know what? We haven't eaten in a while. And it makes sense, right? I'm sure many of you have been in stressful situations where someone actually has to remind you, have you eaten anything? Right? Because that's the last thing on your mind when you're going through pain, heartache, whatever. So listen, it's not like they're on the boat in the middle of a hurricane and the guy's like, maybe I'll make some bread. Like, that just doesn't make any sense, right? You're just trying to not die. And so Paul's like, guys, we haven't eaten anything in 2 weeks. And so we need to eat something because it will strengthen us. It will help us feel better. And Paul says, again, not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you. Why? Because Paul's God is with us. And so he breaks bread and he prays and he shares a meal. Some scholars have said, oh, this is Paul leading them in communion. I don't think so, because I think the majority of the people on the ship are pagans. And so Paul's just, hey, thank you, God, for this bread. And he breaks it and passes it out. And they share a meal together. We're told that 276 people are on board. That's a lot. This is a big ship. And then the last thing that they do is they throw all the grain overboard. It's like, okay, if we're going to run aground, let's make our boat as light as possible. We have to ditch all the grain. I think up until this point, it was like, maybe we can still get the grain to Rome and get paid. But now it's like, nah, Let's dump it into the ocean so that we have the best chance of staying alive. What I want you to see is that through all of this, Paul, does he not just seem at total peace? I mean, he's encouraging the sailors. He's reminding them to eat. He's reminding them that, hey, nothing bad is going to happen to you. And I think it's because the presence of God is with them. And Paul is remembering the purposes of God. If you remember, like this would have been years ago now in the story, Jesus himself had appeared to Paul and said, Paul, you are going to testify about me in Rome. And again, this angel comes while they're in this storm, and the angel says to Paul, Paul, you are going to stand before Caesar. So even in the midst of the storm, it's like Paul is like, no, God's presence is with me, and I'm remembering his purposes for my life. I'm not going to drown in this storm because God promised that I'm going to go to Rome. Which leads to our last section, shipwrecked. Verse 39, now when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, and at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. Then hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest on planks or on pieces of the ship. So they see land, they don't recognize the island, and so if you want to put up the map again, the little red circle on the left, that's the island of Malta. That's where they ended up. So notice they've been kind of tossed all over the place, and so finally they come and they see the island of Malta, and they see kind of a bay on the island with a beach, and the plan is, let's just try and beach the ship. Let's run it aground, then at least we're out of the storm, and we're safe on the island. And so they get rid of their anchors, all the weight that would have been. They lower the rudder, they raise the sail, and it's like, let's head for land. And then they hit a reef, and they get stuck. And we're told that the front of the ship gets stuck, and the back of the ship now is being destroyed by the waves crashing against it. Like literally the ship is being split apart. And it's at this point that the soldiers want to kill all of the prisoners. Now, you might be asking, well, why? Why would they resort to that? Let me just remind you, in the Roman world, as a soldier, you were responsible for your prisoners, and if your prisoners ever escaped, the punishment that they would have gotten was given to you. Right? So if they were on death row and then your prisoner escapes, you as the soldier get killed. And so there's this thinking among the soldiers, okay, we have all these prisoners on board. They're just going to make a break for it on the island and escape. So let's just kill all of them now before that happens. But notice what the centurion says. He doesn't want that to happen because he wants to save Paul. So clearly there's some kind of affinity or friendship perhaps that has been formed. And the centurion's like, well, I don't want Paul to die. So listen, soldiers, don't kill any of the prisoners. So everyone who can swim, jump overboard, swim to the island. And if you don't know how to swim, grab onto planks or pieces of the ship and let's get off the boat that's being torn apart and we'll make for the island. And notice the very last sentence of our chapter. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. That's so key. Not one of the 276 people on board perished. Exactly what God had said. In the midst of the storm, Paul says, listen, not one of you is going to die. And our chapter ends, and everybody that was on the ship made it safely to shore. So as we think about this passage, I mean, what an unbelievable series of events that Paul and these prisoners and soldiers and all 276 people aboard this ship went through. But as we think about applying it, I think two things to remember. As you and I face trial, pain, hardship, the storms of life, if you will. And the first is that you have to remember that God's presence will be with you in the midst of the storm. Like God is with Paul. He hasn't forgotten him. The storm is not breaking news to him. He is fully aware. And he is not leaving Paul just alone in the Mediterranean, floating around on a ship that's going to sink. No, God's presence is with him. And the Bible is full of examples of God's presence with people through trials. Like I said earlier, nowhere in Scripture are we promised, hey, if you follow God, you won't have any more hardships in life. And yet you read all of these passages about God's promise to be with us in the storm. But like I said earlier, many of us respond like these pagan sailors where we're just throw our hands up and we're like, well, all hope is lost. No one is going to rescue me. Where is God? Why is he doing this? Even all the examples that we have in the Bible, do you know that God never or rarely shows up early? Now, he's never late. He always arrives right when he should, but he is very rarely early in our minds, right? I'm sure that they're like, hey, rather than making us go through a storm for 2 weeks, God, why don't you just stop the storm on day one or before the storm starts? But you will read the Bible and you will see that God rarely shows up early. He always shows up exactly when he's supposed to, and it's usually right before all hope is lost. So let me give you some examples. God saves his people from Egypt, right? The Exodus. The Israelites are slaves in Egypt, and God sends 10 plagues against the Egyptians. And finally, Pharaoh lets the Israelites go, and they're leaving the land of Egypt. And then they come to the Red Sea, which was huge, and they're kind of going like, well, what do we do now? And then Pharaoh and all of his army is coming down the bank to destroy the Israelites. And all of the Israelites are like, why did you bring us out here to die? And at the last moment, fire from heaven comes down and blocks the army, and the Red Sea parts. And God's like, walk across on dry land. Right? He comes through right at the last moment. Right when all hope seems lost. Think about the fiery furnace and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If you don't bow down to this idol, we're going to burn you alive. And they say, nope, we will not worship any other gods. And God doesn't show up and save them before they're thrown in the furnace. Actually, the furnace gets heated 7 times hotter. And those 3 young men are thrown into the furnace. And then God shows up in the midst of the fire. When all hope seems lost, think about Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel, you're not allowed to pray to any other god except the king. And Daniel prays to Yahweh, and then he's arrested, and then we're going to throw you into a den full of man-eating lions. And God doesn't show up and change the king's heart before Daniel's thrown in. No, Daniel is thrown in, and the pit is covered, and all night he's in there, and that's when God shows up. When he's in the midst of the lions and the lions' mouths are closed and he's not harmed. You think about Abraham and Isaac. Abraham is told by God, I want you to sacrifice your son. And Abraham is like, wait, what? The son that you promised to give me? Why would you do this, God? I don't understand, but okay, I'm going to obey you. And they go up the mountain, and Abraham builds the altar and puts the wood on it and puts his son on it. And at the last moment before he's going to kill his son, God says, okay, stop. Right? And intervenes and saves. Even in the book of Acts, Peter is arrested and thrown into jail, and not once, but several times, but in Acts 12, it's not like God intervenes and saves Peter from being roughed up and thrown into jail. No, it's when he's in jail that God shows up and releases his chains and opens the gates, and Peter walks out free. I mean, we could go all morning over and over all of these accounts that we have recorded of the people of God getting to the brink of losing all hope, and then God shows up and saves them. And not only does God show up and save them, but he's promised us that as we go through these painful trials and hardships, that he's actually with us in the storm. Let me just read to you two passages. Again, the Bible is full of promises. But Isaiah 41, God says to his people, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. For I, the Lord your God, hold your right hand. It's I who say to you, fear not. I'm the one who helps you." Verse 17, "When the poor and the needy seek water, and there is none, and their tongue is parched with thirst, I, the Lord, will answer them. I, the God of Israel, will not forsake them. I will open rivers on the bare heights and fountains in the midst of the valleys. I will make the wilderness a pool of water, and the dry land springs of water." Like God says, I don't think when you go through hard seasons of life and the storms are blowing and you don't know where you are, don't assume that God has forgotten you. He's like, no, I'm with you. God says, I'm literally holding your hand as you go through the storm. God says in 2 Corinthians Chapter 1, Paul writes, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in our affliction so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God." So notice that Paul doesn't say, "Blessed be the God of our Father, our God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who never lets us go through afflictions." No, he says, he comforts us in our affliction. So can I just say, when you face painful times in life, you must cling to the promise that God's presence is with you. He has not forgotten you. And then secondly, you need to remember the purposes of God. God will often use these things in our lives for a specific purpose. For Paul, he was like, "Hey, Paul, even though you're going through a storm, you're going to make it to Rome. Let me remind you, I have a purpose for your life, and this storm is not going to deter you from the purpose that I have for you." So for some of you, listen, you've gone through that stormy season, and by God's grace, you've been able to look back and God's revealed to you the purpose for it. Sometimes God in his grace, he does that. You'll go through a storm and then you look back and you're like, okay, now I see what God was doing. So sometimes that happens. The harder ones to deal with is when God doesn't reveal his purpose right away. And listen, you might not get the answer until eternity. And then you can ask Jesus face to face. But in that moment, you need to trust the purposes of God. Okay, God is working out all things ultimately for his glory and my good. Even this really hard, terrible situation, I can trust that God's presence is with me and that he is working out his purposes in me and through me. If you're here this morning and you're not a follower of Jesus, you might be saying, okay, well, I'm going through storms. I'm going through a hard season. I don't even claim to follow Jesus. Why, if there is a God, is he doing this? And can I just say, often God will use the painful moments of your life so that your eyes will be opened and you'll turn to him. You want to know why he has to use those moments? Because you would never come to him unless it was for those moments. Like, listen, if your life is like smooth sailing and nothing ever is happening, many times you will say, well, why do I need God? And it's the storms that God sends and he uses in your life so that you lift your head and you go, I cannot do this. And God often uses these painful moments to draw people to himself so that you will stop relying on yourself and you will cry out to him, Jesus, save me. And then he does. So if you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus and you're like in the midst of a storm, perhaps it's because the God of the universe is trying to draw you to himself. He's saying, come to me. I'm not going to necessarily take all the hardships away, but I will be with you in the midst of the storm. Come to me. There's another story in the Bible about another storm, and that's exactly what God was doing. The story of Jonah, God sends a storm because Jonah was being disobedient, but the ship is full of pagan sailors who do not believe in the God of the Bible, and we're told that they're asking, well, what's the problem? What's the cause of this storm? And then it's figured out that Jonah is being punished, and so they throw Jonah overboard, and the storm stops, and it says at the end of that section that all of the sailors on board feared the Lord and made vows to him. Right, so what was it? Well, it was the storm that opened their eyes to go, there is only one true God. So if that's you, can I just encourage you that God might be drawing you to himself, and you need to run to him. It doesn't mean that all the hardships will go away, but God's presence will be with you in the midst of them. So if you are a follower of Jesus, I just want to encourage you that we are guaranteed, because we live in just a fallen, broken world, that we're going to face pain, hardship, storms, trials. And yet when those things happen, we don't just throw our hands up and say, well, all hope is lost. No, we cling to the presence of our God with us, who is holding our right hand and walking with us through the storm. And we cling to the purposes of our God, that even though we can't see the whole picture now, no, God is working out all things for his glory and my good. And that is what gets us through these storms. So God, I am so grateful for your word. What an unbelievable story that we read about. This literal 2-week hurricane that Paul and everyone else on the ship lived through. And yet, in the midst of that storm, God, your presence was with them, and you made a promise that not one of them would perish. And God, you always keep your promises. And at the end of our chapter, we see that everyone makes it safely off the ship. So God, I thank you that you are not some distant God who doesn't care about the things that we go through, but over and over and over again, your word tells us that you are with us in the midst of the storm. That we actually don't have to be afraid. We don't throw our hands up and say, well, I'm doomed, all hope is lost. But we cling to your presence with us, your comfort, and we cling to your purposes for the storms in our life. So God, I know that in a room this big, that there are people who literally right now are in the midst of that, who maybe are at a point in their life where they're like, all hope seems lost. So, oh God, would you be a God of comfort to them? God, your presence is always with us, but I pray that they would be so aware of your presence with them in the storm, holding their hand, guiding them. And that would be such a source of comfort and relief that we can take heart. For those in this room who don't know you, God, I just pray that you would be opening their hearts to say, well, maybe these storms that are happening in my life is because there actually is a God who's trying to get my attention. So that I would turn to him and follow him and have new meaning and light and purpose and freedom in him. And so, Holy Spirit, would you just do a work in each one of our hearts to either encourage us and strengthen us or convict us this morning. Thank you that you are near to us as we go through struggles. And so because of that, we just worship you this morning. God, thank you for who you are. And so we just pray all of this in your mighty name, Jesus. Amen.